Hey guys, so I wanted to talk a little bit about just some of the things I've been thinking recently about the functions and my take on things based on what's been happening recently. um, so I've been thinking a lot about what would cause someone to be intellectual, and I'm realizing that the more I think about it, I don't think that thinking functions make you intellectual. First of all, I think anyone can be intellectual. Anyone has the potential to be if they so choose. Um, that's in anyone. If anyone wants to decide to really invest in a conceptual understanding of things. But I do think that it's a more natural tendency for people who have intuition very high up in their stack. Um, because it veers our interests, our natural inclinations toward the theoretical sort of realm. And so if you see two intuitives having a conversation, I guess, like, regardless of their judging functions, I would say, regardless of if they're thinkers or not, you could see a very intellectual conversation happening. And of course, I think the higher the NT energy is in someone's stack, like if they're using both intuition and thinking, is probably going to take that up a notch. Probably going to increase, I guess, the intensity of their theorizing because it gets a little more aggressively logical. But I think that I would say overall it's really intuition rather than thinking. I think that makes people interested in the intellectual because it is intuition is taking reality and abstracting it into a concept, and to me that's very intellectual. It's theorizing on the meaning behind reality. Now, I think that thinking and feeling functions are not about the picture that we see, because intuition and sensing is about the picture that we literally see, how we take in and look at the world around us, how we interpret reality. But thinking and feeling are not about how we interpret reality, how we theorize. They are about how we decide to make actual decisions for ourselves. And that's where it gets interesting, because you can get, I think, people of different judgment axes talking about the same stuff. Like, you get an NFJ and an NTJ in the same room, and they're going to be very interested in talking about the same, like, theoretical stuff, I think. But the point where that would become an issue, like a conversation of sort of where there's, like, arguments or strife coming up or whatever, would be, I think, where their judgments start shifting away from each other. And, you know, fundamentally different processes for what's behind the actions that they take. Because, like, FETI is about, like, sorry, let me back up. I'm gonna go with, to point out, like, the thinking side of it. So, like, take TEFI, for instance. They're going to be submitting everything to the logical rule of efficiency outside of them. What literally works for everybody, what is the outward criteria, and that once that criteria externally is met, everyone can meet their own internal feeling preferences for themselves. Everyone can make their own selves happy, because that's gonna, to a TEFI user, personal preferences are to be respected, but outside needs for what needs to actually get done in order to allow for a context in which those feeling needs can be met, that happens outside for everybody, creating the system that works for everyone, so that in their own free time they have more ability to do what they want within that context, I guess, if that kind of makes sense. But for FETI, or if I'm going with thinking preferences here, TIFE, it's different because it's the principle for what is right is located within them, and it's subjective, rather than this outside objective principle of efficiency for everybody. It's this, for every action that they take, they need to be 100% convinced, because they don't want to take an action that isn't authentic to them, that they don't trust is like literally the most reasonable to them. So they need to be like, okay, well, why am I doing this for me? And this is separate from the theory of reality. This is their own personal philosophy on why they take the actions that they do. It's what is behind the decisions that they make. And they want to trust it when you connect it to FE, ultimately, so that they know that they're good for people, because they're convinced for themselves that they're doing everything in their power to be reasonable, and they trust that they're doing everything they can, and so they also kind of expect everyone else to do what's reasonable to them and feel convicted about any action they take, that they trust it for themselves. And then in that context, you can benefit other people emotionally, because you trust that what you're doing is actually going to be good for them, because you trust for yourself that it makes sense to you. And I may not be explaining that completely accurately, but that's sort of the sense that I'm getting. And I feel like there's one more thing I wanted to talk about. It's escaping me. But anyway, for now, that's just sort of, that's my spiel on intellectual and what makes something intellectual. Because, yeah, I think that it's the intuition that causes you to be theoretically intellectual, and that has really nothing to do with thinking, because thinking has to do with why we take the actions that we do. It's a decision-making process. And so I see why that might be really confusing, because a perspective on reality might look like rationality because we're trying to interpret it correctly, but introverted intuition is really trying to make sense. It is trying to make sense. I would say that, trying to make sense of reality. Especially introverted intuition, is trying to create a cohesive understanding of the physical world, SE. So, yeah, when you start conflating thinking with what makes sense, which is easy because those words go with it, like, you might go, like, what literally makes sense? What is, like, plausible in reality of the picture that I see? This sounds kind of thinky, right? Because you might also say, when making your own decision, like a TI thing, like, oh, it makes sense to me to do it this way. Might use the same words, but a totally different sense to those words. Like, if you're saying, like, this makes sense to me about reality, you might be saying, the picture holds and is cohesive. And if you're saying, this makes sense for why I took this action, you're saying, my internal principle of what I believe is right for me or not is holding up for me. And I think a lot of times we might use the word makes sense to mean, like, plausibility, or it holds, it is cohesive, and it sticks. So for that reason, I believe that tracking the word makes sense is maybe going to lead you to misinterpret certain functions, because that word can come from many different places and intentions. And I really see the word making sense as meaning cohesive. It holds. And it could either hold in reality of how the world works, what is physically plausible, what is theoretically coherent, or it could mean makes sense because to me it fits everything that I agree with in order for me to act upon it. So I don't know if that is sort of making sense, but that is just, that's my thoughts and my theory on intellect and how that relates to type. So yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know what y'all think. Thanks for watching. Have an awesome day.